So I'm here with Tom Haviland, a freelance data analysis. He has done a survey of over 125 funeral directors and embalmers from across the country. And what has been reported is astonishing. Tom, before we get into that, though, I want to go into your background. You have like a really interesting story. Where are you from originally?
Originally from Marion, Ohio, is my hometown. I'm actually living right now in a suburb of Dayton, Ohio, called Beaver Creek, not too far from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, which is where I worked before I retired. To give a little people the background on me, I'm a retired U.S. Air Force major. Spent 20 years in the U.S. Air
Thank you for
Force.
your service.
Oh, my pleasure. I then spent 16 years after that as a defense contractor working with the Air Force. So a total of 36 years in and with the U.S. Air Force, and loved my career. I worked with really cool aircraft during that time. I'm an electrical engineer by trade. I have a math degree from Ohio State University, electrical engineering degree from Louisiana Tech, a master's in computer resources and information management from Webster University in St. Louis. And so I'm a data guy. I'm an engineer type guy. I love math and data analysis, and I've done that my whole career. I worked with really cool aircraft like the F-16 fighter, the F-22 Raptor, which is our most modern Air Force fighter jet. I also did a stint with the F-117 stealth fighter as an engineer, working with them. That's our one of our. It's actually retired now. The aircraft's retired, and it retired the same year that I did, back in 2009 from the Air Force. So I had a wonderful career, Ryan, but it all came to an abrupt halt in October of 2021 because the vaccine mandates came out.
Right.
And you remember Joe Biden had put the vaccine mandates out for the military, government civilians, and those of us defense contractors like myself. I was a defense contractor at that time working at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Ohio. So the story I'm going to tell your viewers today is basically, I think it's going to be interesting to them because it's a story of your medical freedom, right? And your right to decide for yourself what goes into your body. Only you and only you should be making that decision. You shouldn't be mandated to do it. You shouldn't be coerced to do it. And I know a lot of people, were feeling pressure several years ago to take a certain medical intervention into themselves, and people, I think, were coerced to do it under duress, under pressure from friends, under threat of losing their job. And unfortunately, I think a lot of people are regretting having done that because we've seen since then there's been a mysterious uptick in a lot of strange injuries. Excess mortality has been up the last few years in countries that were highly jabbed. So, and people are the experts are at a loss to explain why. There's a lot of us out there that believe we know why, and there's been a lot of really interesting side effects. And one of them are these white fibrous clots that I'll be talking about today that embalmers are finding in their corpses. It's really strange.
And you learned about the white fibrous clots, I guess, from watching the documentary Died Suddenly.
Yeah. Before we do that, I'll go back to my origin story. Like I said, in October of 2021, I was actually fired from my job at the Air Force Base for refusing to take the COVID-19 jab. And I had done some research, like I said, being a data guy. I had looked. I didn't want to take it right away when it came out because I knew it was new technology. mRNA-based shots using a lipid nanoparticle delivery system, and I wasn't that comfortable with this new technology. So I said, I'll do a wait and see approach and see and let some data come in to see what's happening. Well, sure enough, they actually stopped the Johnson & Johnson shots. They weren't an mRNA-based shot, but they were an adenovector type shot. But they paused those in April of 2021 because of blood clotting problems. Then they mysteriously brought them back and let them go again for about another year until they finally took them off the market completely, and then told people just to get Pfizer or Moderna for their boosters. But I was doing research. Our own CDC wasn't putting out much information, Ryan, and during the
Right.
summer into early fall of 2021. So I went to the UK. They were putting out information. They had their counterpart to the CDC called Public Health England was putting out what's called a technical briefing every couple of weeks. And it was the title, I think, is called SARS-CoV-2 Variants of Concern, technical briefing number 23, which was dated 17 September of 2021, showed thousands, in fact, hundreds of thousands of breakthrough cases of COVID amongst the fully vaccinated. So there's a table 5 in that document that showed. So we knew very well by that time that the jabs were not stopping you from catching COVID or transmitting, as other people then later on found out when they finally admitted it at the CDC and the FDA.
Right, 100%. Yeah.
But people that were searching for the data back in 2021, even though it was not being talked about in the mainstream media, we were seeing the data. People were taking the time to do the research. And then secondly, I thought it was unethical when Joe Biden came out with the mandates in September of 2021 for the military, government civilians, and the defense contractors, because it violated everything of what's called the Nuremberg Code. That was the code that was set up at the end of World War II in Germany that they actually used to try doctors for doing cruel experiments on the Jews in Nazi Germany. And from then on, all the civilized nations of the world, the Allies, decided that, hey, we're going to need to put rules into place that a person should, no medical procedure should be done to anybody without their voluntary consent, that it should be an informed consent, right? They should know the duration of the experiment, for example. We didn't know the duration of this experiment, right? When they first got the shots, they thought, okay, we're going to give you 2 shots and you'll be done. Then they say, we're going to need to do endless boosters, and now we're into like booster number 7, 8. I don't even know where we're at now, but it's way up there in terms of boosters. They didn't know really the mechanics of how the shot worked. They thought it would stay in your upper arm and not move around your body, but they were wrong there too. They didn't think it was getting into mother's breast milk, etc. So I decided I didn't want to take the shot, and a 3-star Air Force general had sent out an email in early October, giving everybody the dates they had to get the shot by, or else get kicked out of the military or your job. So I sent him back an email, Ryan, and I said, "Shame on you." Remember, this is an Air Force 3-star general I'm talking to. I said, "Shame on you for not standing up for our right to decide for ourselves whether or not to get injected with an experimental drug. And you spent your time trying to guilt us into taking the jab. Shame on you." And I didn't just send that email to him. I CC'd all 30,000 people that work at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Ohio. It's the largest single site employer in the state of Ohio, Ryan. And I did that on purpose. I knew what was going to happen. I got a call a half hour later and from my boss at the company I work for, the defense contractor, and I was fired from my $165,000 a year job as an engineer because I had shamed this Air Force general in front of the entire base.
Right.
But it had to be done. None of the colonels, none of the generals were pushing back at all, Ryan. They knew, I think, deep down that it was unethical what was being done, that people should be able to make the decision for themselves. But they were just being yes men. They were either being cowards or they were being tyrants.
Tom, though, like with the fact, though, it was a public health emergency, like I could understand, though, like, your choice, you should have the choice to be, if you want to take the shot, which you do. But I guess like your employer, do you think it was wrong, like, for them to fire you because like you didn't get the shot? And like, why so? Because like, employers, like, you're a military guy, like you got to get vaccinations to be in the military, like what will be your argument to that?
The argument is that this is different because this was an experimental shot. The others were tried and true. They had been based on years of research, right? The other vaccines like measles, mumps, and rubella, tetanus shots, that kind of stuff. But we know this was a hurried shot that was coming out, right? It was warp speed.
But
came out less than,
wasn't it approved by the FDA, the CDC?
No, it wasn't. The version that we got, Ryan, was not approved by the FDA. The only version that they approved of the drug to this day, in fact, is the Comirnaty version, which is based on a different manufacturing process than the jabs that were actually mass produced using a different process that everybody in the world's been receiving. So it was a kind of a bait and switch by Pfizer to get the emergency use authorization. Remember, even that shot doesn't have full FDA approval. They got an emergency use authorization for the Comirnaty version of the drug, but then they did a bait and switch and they actually gave everybody around the world the Pfizer vaccine based upon their process 2, which is a different way completely of growing the because they had to produce millions and millions of vials, right? Hundreds of millions of vials. In order to do that, they had to use a different process where they used actually plasmid DNA and they used E. coli actually to grow enough of the mRNA to then mass produce the hundreds of millions of vials that they would need. So like I said, I decided that there and then I made my stand. So then what I did after that, Ryan, is for a year about after that, from the fall of 2021 to the fall of 2022, for about 120 days during that year span, I stood at a sign at a busy street corner here in Dayton, Ohio, very close to the Air Force Base, a sign that said no vax mandate. I was battling the mandates at that time, saying, hey, you know, it should be your decision. And that was an interesting psychological experiment in itself, because what I saw was a kind of a trend going on, Ryan, of I probably saw about I stood at that corner maybe about 5 hours a day. You know, I caught the lunch crowd and then the going home crowd at night. Would take a little break in the afternoon. So I probably saw about 500,000 cars go by during the 120 days that I was out there, about over 600 hours. And the out of every 100 cars that went by, I'd say about 60% of them did nothing. They didn't react. They were too busy in their day, or they didn't care. There was a full 20% though that honked their horns, gave me a thumbs up when they went by, cheered, saying, "Yeah, it's your right to decide for yourselves. It shouldn't be mandated on us." But then there was this full 20% of people who gave me the middle finger, say
Right.
"F you," say, "You're killing grandma, get the shot." And what's really interesting about that is during the whole year I was out there, as more and more information came out about negative information about how bad the jabs were doing, and that they weren't stopping people from catching COVID, for example,
Right.
and people, and more of these side effects started coming out, like myocarditis, uh, blood clots, miscarriages, nerve damage, palsies, all kinds of stuff. That percentage that hated me never changed. They were locked in. They still hated me, even at the end of that year period going into the fall of 2022. So my message started to change over that year, because I started to see that there were some real problems with the shot. So my message kind of changed from I'm against the mandates to just I'm against the jabs, period. For reasons, because I think the jabs are dangerous. So that led me to watch that film, Died Suddenly. It came out the week of Thanksgiving of a year ago,
Right.
back in 2022. It came out the Monday of the week of Thanksgiving. And for your viewers, it's about an hour-long documentary. And about half that film is devoted to these 6 or 7 embalmers that have started finding these strange white fibrous clots like this. Can you see, see that? That's what they're finding in their corpses. And they started finding that they've been embalmed for 20 or 30 years and have never seen that before, but started seeing that in 2021. Isn't that interesting? Which is just about the time that the interventions came out. So what was really interesting in that film is at the 13-minute mark, Ryan, there's an amazing statement made. An embalmer from the state of Indiana, Mr. Wallace Hooker, who runs his own funeral home in Indiana, and he does his own lecturing as well. He was speaking at an Ohio Embalmers Association conference back in Columbus, Ohio, on the 26th of October of 2022. And he showed photographs of these white fibrous clots to an audience of about 100 embalmers. And he asked them, "Are you seeing these same white fibrous clots that I'm seeing?" And he said almost the entire audience of 100 embalmers raised their hands, yes. He then asked him, "Well, when did you start seeing them?" So they all agreed it was in the middle of 2021, after about 6 months after the jab started. So that was an amazing statement. Whatever else happened in that movie, that was an amazing statement, right? It's either true or false. So I got up the next morning, Tuesday of the week of Thanksgiving last year, and I said, I don't think any reporter is going to chase after this story. So I called the Ohio Embalmers Association myself. They're located in Cincinnati, Ohio. And I talked to their president, Mr. Dan Becker, their vice president, Mr. Woody Wilson, and their secretary, Mr. David Hicks. And I asked all 3 gentlemen, did you happen to be in the room at the time those 100 embalmers supposedly raised their hands saying they're seeing these clots too? Well, unfortunately, none of the 3 of them happened to be in the room at the time. But the vice president, Mr. Woody Wilson, who runs his own funeral home up in Marysville, Ohio, about an hour north of where I live, and he does his embalming. A lot of funeral home directors do their own embalming as well. Woody said, "Tom, I'm seeing the white fibrous clots too." So I said, "Wow, this is a big deal, right?" Now I have an official officer from the Ohio Embalmers Association corroborating what these 6 or 7 embalmers in the Died Suddenly film are seeing. So I said, well, I need to do a survey, a nationwide survey, which then I later on turned into a worldwide survey to see just how big this phenomenon is around the world amongst embalmers. So that's exactly what I did, Ryan. I created a worldwide embalmer blood clot survey that I ran last December through last March, and obtained some shocking results. So
I wanted to ask Tom about the correlation of the fibrous clots to the vaccine. How can you connect getting the vaccine to these clots?
I
You know,
can't specifically. All I can do is link. There's a temporal correlation, right? And then you'll hear the argument. Well, correlation doesn't necessarily mean causation. So I cannot definitively say that the jabs are causing the clots, but there's an awfully strong correlation temporally, time wise, between the time that the rollout of the jabs came about in early 2021 and the appearance of these white fibrous clots starting in 2021. So, I mean, you can kind of put two and two together, but let me go through some of the data, and that may help better explain what they're seeing. Before I do that, though, I'll try to tell you how I ran the survey. I tried to do it as unbiasedly as possible.
right.
So what I did is I addressed, any good reporter addresses the main questions, right? Who, what, where, when, why, and how. A couple of the questions I could not ask in the survey, one of them was who, because there's a certain privacy to the embalming room. Embalmers, you don't like to talk about the dead. Plus, I knew the embalmers themselves might be a little skittish on answering the survey because they're attuned to this privacy. Plus, they may not want to rock the boat for their employer, the funeral home they're working for, because they see doctors out there getting their licenses pulled and certifications taken away if they're talking anything bad about the jabs. So there's a hesitancy, I'm sure, on the part of the embalmers to answer any survey where they have to identify themselves. So we solved that problem by allowing them to take the survey that we put on SurveyMonkey. We allow them to take the survey anonymously. We turned off the IP tracking feature in SurveyMonkey, so we couldn't tell where the um, responses were coming from, what computer they were coming from. What we did do know, though, is based on the first question we asked the embalmers, hey, what state are you from? So we know what state they were in, as they answered the questions. The other question we really couldn't ask, as you alluded to earlier, Ryan, is why or how the clots are forming. Because that's not an embalmer's not trained to know that, right? All his job is to get the blood out of the body, get the formaldehyde, the funeral, the blood in, or excuse me, the embalming fluid in, and then get that body ready to present for a funeral service, right? So they can't answer the question or how or why the clots are forming, but they can tell you what, are they seeing the white fibrous clots? When do they start seeing them? Where on the body they're finding them, and then how much and what percentage of their corpses are they seeing these clots? So that's what the survey centered around, those main questions. We also, by the way, at no point in the survey do we ever mention the words COVID or COVID vaccine. We didn't want to bias the survey in any way. So all we did, like I said, is ask those embalmers, those questions. What are you seeing? When? Where in the body? And how much? So the next thing I had to do after develop the questions is get them distributed out to as many embalmers as possible. So I used a two-prong approach. I chose the 30 most populated states in the United States, and I sent an email to the presidents of their state funeral director associations. Each state, like Florida or Ohio or Illinois, has its own funeral director association with hundreds of members on it. So I sent the email with the link to the survey to their president, asking that president to forward it down to their hundreds of members underneath their association. I also use a bottom-up approach. I actually looked up the email addresses for over 800 funeral homes across the United States in major cities. So, like, for example, in California, I would send it to funeral homes in, San Francisco, Oakland, LA, San Diego, San Jose, Sacramento, for example. And then I did that around the world as well. I actually wound up sending it to over 1,700 funeral homes in countries around the world. So I distributed as much as I could to try to maximize the number, amount of results I got. And I did get results. I got results from 179 embalmers from around the world, Ryan. And here's kind of a synopsis of what I got. The first question we asked them is, are you seeing the white fibrous clots? And out of the 179 embalmers that responded, 119 of them, almost exactly 2/3, 66%, are indeed seeing the white fibrous clots in their corpses, these things. So they're seeing them. So that's kind of shocking in and of itself, right? And it's confirmation now that those 6 or 7 embalmers and died suddenly, what they're seeing is true, right? Because now we have a lot of corroboration from embalmers all around the world. The next question I asked them is, what years, plural, did you see these white fibrous clots? And they had the option of answering any year between 2018 through 2022, which is we ran the survey. Like I said, it ended uh, last year. So I put that on there on purpose because 2018 and 2019 were years before we had COVID, right? So the embalmers weren't seeing the clot, and very few said they saw clots of this type. There was a smattering, but it's very small. So I think the ones that did answer that way may have confused that question with, and then these white fibrous clots with what's called chicken fat clots. Chicken fat clots embalmers have been seeing forever. They're kind of yellowish in nature. They're smaller and they tear very easily. They're very different than these white fibrous clots, though. These are much larger, longer, and tougher. They're very difficult to break, even with like forceps. So, and they're real rubbery. Um, so I think that a few of the embalmers may have mistaken that question and answered it incorrectly. However, that's just, I took whatever answers I got, right? I didn't call any answers out. I took whatever I got and displayed that information. Now, in 2020, of the 119 embalmers that said they saw the white fibrous clots, 2020, 44 of the embalmers said they saw them in the year 2020, which is interesting because that's the year that we actually had COVID, but no vaccines out yet, right? So that would point to the fact that COVID itself, the virus, may be causing the formation of these white fibrous clots, right? To a smaller extent. And that makes sense because you remember the COVID virus itself has a spike protein on its surface. And that spike protein is what we think is leading to the formation of what's called amyloid proteins. It's AMYLOID, amyloid proteins. It's just a fancy way of saying a misshaped or misfolded protein. So we think the spike protein that's on the surface of the COVID virus can help cause the formation of these white fibrous clots, these misshapenly misfolded amyloid proteins that then start to grow in your body. And we all have an enzyme, a natural enzyme called plasmin in our body that's used to break down normal clotting when it occurs. But if that clot is misshapenly folded, it becomes difficult for that enzyme plasmin to attach. So then the clots tend to grow and persist. What we think may have happened, though, in 2021, starting then when many more of the embalmers said they started seeing these white fibrous clots. In fact, 95 of the embalmers said they saw the clots in 2021 compared to the 44 that was in 2020. And 109 embalmers responding said they saw the white fibrous clots in the year 2022. And I'm doing their survey again this next year, and I'm going to ask them if they're still seeing them in 2023. And my bet is they are, because I'm in contact with a lot of embalmers who are still seeing them personally. So what we think happened there starting in 2021 with the advent of the jabs, Ryan, is that we all know that the jabs were supposed to stay in your upper arm and the deltoid muscle up here in your upper arm and produce just enough of the spike protein to elicit an immune response to your system to get you ready for COVID when it came. But now we know that's not what happened at all. That jab, the mRNA goes all over your body, and they have found it all over your body in autopsies they've done, pathological slides. And so it turns your entire body into a spike protein factory, producing this dangerous spike protein that can lead to the formation of these clots. And they found it not doing it just for a few days to a week, but for months at a time. Months after the person's been injected, they're still finding the mRNA producing the spike protein. So this is catastrophic, right? This is not the way they had planned to do it. So what we believe has happened now is the jabs have supercharged the effect of the formation of these white fibrous clots with the spike protein that's being produced by the vaccine. So it's speculation at this point, but it seems to fit the data very closely that we got from the embalmers. The next question we asked Ryan was, where are you seeing the clots? And there was really no surprise here. Embalmers have two main injection site points on the body. The main one is the carotid artery in the neck. And not surprisingly, that's where they saw most of these white fibrous clots showing up. The second part, the most common location, is the iliac artery down in the pelvis that then runs down into your femoral arteries that go down your legs. And that was the second most popular site where they found clots. So I think it's just that doesn't necessarily mean that's where the clots were forming, but that's where they were being flushed to as the fluid's being pumped through the body, right? As you're pumping out the blood and pumping in the formaldehyde. So no real surprise there. But was surprising, Ryan, and maybe the most shocking part of all of this survey is one of the last questions we asked. We asked the embalmers, in what percentage of your corpses in the year 2022, this last year, that you've embalmed, are you seeing these large white fibrous clots like the ones I held up in the little jar? Well, of the 119 embalmers who were seeing the clots, 39 of them saw them between 1 to 20% of their corpses. Another 29 embalmers are seeing these clots between 21 to 40% of their corpses, Ryan. Another 30 embalmers out of the 119 are seeing these clots between 41 to 60% of their corpses. There was even 17 embalmers saying they're seeing these clots between 61 to 80% of their corpses. So that shocked me, even me, when I got that result. It's telling me that this is not a rare phenomenon. Embalmers all over the country, all over the world, are seeing these white fibrous clots in a significant percentage of their corpses.
Thomas, the problem though that I see is that embalmers and funeral directors, as we said, they're not medical professionals, and plus embalmers, they don't typically know that someone who died was in normal health, as is often claimed in the documentary. Nor do we see they don't know someone's vaccination status. So an anatomical pathology specialist, her name was Irene Sansano, she told a fact-checking website that clots shown by Hersman in the documentary don't look different from the ones pathologists regularly see in blood clot autopsies at the hospital. To know if there really was an uptick in clots seen during embalming, we can't rely on a scattering of anecdotes. We would need a database to monitor trends. And as Schmidt points out, this database doesn't exist. What would be your response to that?
My response to that is her information is erroneous. These embalmers that I've been in contact with and that have taken the survey, like I said, most have been embalming for 10, 20 years. They've never seen these clots before in the 10, 20 years that they've been doing embalming. They've seen traditional grape jelly clots. And this is, like I said, I got the same information from the vice president of the Ohio Embalmers Association.
Yeah.
So you don't have to believe the embalmers and die suddenly. Mr. Woody Wilson, who runs it, like I said, runs his own funeral home in Marysville, Ohio. He's a respected officer. He's the vice president of the Ohio Embalmers Association. You don't get to that position being a flake. So he knows what he's talking about. Says, Tom, I've never seen these before until 2021. What they have seen in the past are traditional, what's called grape jelly or currant jelly clots. Those are the ones that look like grape jelly and they dissolve easily in your hands. They've also seen chicken fat clots as well. But like I said, the yellowish ones that tear easily. But they've never seen these before until 20.
Yeah, I was doing some research, and they were making the claim that the clots are the cause of, because so many people were dying during COVID, like maybe that there was a longer storage period, for bodies, and that was one of the possibilities.
Yes, and we've been investigating that as well. There's controversy as to whether the clots are forming pre-death and causing strokes and heart attack by blood, or if they're being formed after death and only after death. The embalmers that I'm in contact with, Ryan, are convinced
that's a great question right there. Did these clots cause a problem when people were alive? But how would you find that out by talking to the embalmers? I feel like you would need to talk to the coroner or medical professionals to verify that.
Yes, and well, we know there actually have been clots that have been pulled out of living people. There was a young high school football player up in Toledo, Ohio, near the Toledo area, who had massive clots pulled out of both of his legs. He's still alive, thank goodness. I think he's probably on blood thinners now, but he's still alive, but he'll probably never play football again, unfortunately. But the embalmers, like I said, one of the reasons the embalmers are convinced that it's happening pre-death as well as maybe post-death, but they're convinced it is happening before death and causing things like strokes and heart attacks, but which, by the way, are way on the rise. Numerically, we've seen those way up ever since 2021. There's been and that's documented in the insurance industry, in the medical industry, by people like Edward Dowd. I don't know if you're familiar with his work, and taking a look at the all-cause mortality data and excess mortality and seeing what insurance company rates are showing these maladies are going way up. But the embalmers themselves, a lot of times they'll get a call for a fresh body, one that's only a few hours old, and it hasn't been in storage for any amount of time. And they embalm them, and they still find these in them, even though the body's still warm, not even cold yet. So they're convinced, like I said, the embalmers that I talk to, that they are forming pre-death, and it makes sense, right? If one of these things, or a bunch of these things are or blocking veins and arteries, blood can flow around them, and you might feel fatigue, you might feel lethargic, and hey, what's wrong with me, But at some point in time, they'll get to the point where they totally block a critical artery or vein, and then, or a piece of it breaks off and it goes to a critical juncture. That's called an embolism. And then that causes either a stroke or heart attack. So, you know, what can I say? The like I said, but the main point is, like I said, the embalmers have been embalming for years, some of them decades, and have never seen these type of clots until 2021 after the rollout of the jabs. So I don't know what else. And they're not, like I said, they're not saying that they know how the clots are forming. They're not trained to do that. But they are certainly able to tell you, I'm seeing something different than I've never seen before. When you've worked a job for 20 or 30 years, you know what to expect when you open up a body and you're trying to get the blood out and the formaldehyde in, what you typically have seen for the last 10, 20 years. And then when it changes all of a sudden, one of the other changes they're seeing, by the way, Ryan, is what's called dirty blood or coffee grounds in the drainage. As it comes when they drain the blood out, it goes down a table, and they have running water, and then it goes down a drain. And the drainage, a lot of the drainage these days, they're seeing what's called appearance of what looks like coffee grounds or dirty blood. That's an indication of what's called microclotting. And that can be just as dangerous as these large white fibrous clots. Microclotting at a very small level can block critical capillaries like we have, in our lungs, and stop oxygen exchange from going on at the very end of all our arteries and veins, are these much smaller tributaries that then, if they get blocked off, then you get lousy oxygen exchange to all the various organs of the body, the eyes, for example, the brain.
Question, like according to the CDC, like, we were talking about myocarditis, carditis, and pericarditis, like, after, the mRNA COVID-19 vaccination, the CDC would say that's extremely rare. What would be your response to that?
Myocarditis, this is kind of off the subject of clots, but I've done some research on the myocarditis as well. I'm in contact with Dr. Peter McCullough, who's the world famous cardiologist who follows, and he's an expert on the heart. He's I think a bit more published papers on the heart than any other doctor out there, and he's a firm believer that the jabs are causing myocarditis. In fact, CDC, like you say, and FDA, they actually admit that it is, but they say it's rare. I would point your audience to several papers that say that it's not rare. There was a study that was done in Thailand last year where they took a look at 301 high school students. And what they did is they screened them did their EKGs, electrocardiograms, did MRIs on them, and then checked what's called their troponin levels. Troponin's it's a chemical in your blood system that if its levels rise, it's an indication there's some kind of damage going on. So they checked their troponin levels, all that before they gave many injections. And everybody was fine. All 300 kids were perfectly checked out. They then gave them 2 jabs of Pfizer. They then checked their EKGs, MRIs, and checked their troponin levels again. And they found 7 out of the 301 kids, 7, that one of them had a straight case of myocarditis, which is heart inflammation of the heart muscle. 3 of them had pericarditis, which is inflammation of the sac running around the heart. And another 3 had what they call subclinical myocarditis, which is it's not full inflammation yet, but there's an indication because of their raised troponin levels that they were, and they may not even feel the damage, but there was damage nonetheless to them that they didn't know about. That's called subclinical myocarditis. 7 out of 301 kids translates into 1 out of every 43, Ryan. That's not rare. There's another study then that came out earlier this year out of Basel, Switzerland. They studied 777 healthcare workers. And of those 777 healthcare workers, they did basically the same thing, took a look at their levels before they did the study. Then they gave them a Moderna booster. After the Moderna booster, they looked at them again, and they found 22 of them. 22 out of the 777 had sustained some kind of heart damage through indications of MRIs, EKGs, or raised troponin levels. That's 1 out of every 35. So those 2 studies do a good job of corroborating each other. And the sad part about this is, this myocarditis thing is hitting a lot of young males, especially between like the ages of 18 and 30. You see a lot of high school, college guys. I think Damar Hamlin went down with myocarditis, vaccine-induced myocarditis. Now they said it was something else called commotio cordis, where it was a sudden blow to this chest that caused it. A lot of the doctors I've talked to said that's not possible. That's not what happened. That he actually had vaccine-induced myocarditis. There was a big shot of adrenaline that he had, and that's what caused him to go into cardiac arrest
I
from it
think
because he had a damaged heart.
I wanted to ask you because there's a lot of like accusations online about like the died suddenly documentary, and one of them is that like they use a lot of people in the documentary, and they attribute like the illnesses to the COVID vaccine, and like some of them like it they say it fails to bear out statistically, and like the producers of the documentary, they've promoted like new what they call conspiracy theories. Like one of the people in the documentary they use is like a basketball player who collapses on the court. His name's Keontae Johnson, and his fainting, it takes place on December 12th, 2020, before the COVID vaccines
Yes,
were available.
I totally agree. Actually, I said there were some factual errors made in that movie, and I think they used some footage too from other footage too of
Right.
people like spinning around and dropping that was pre-COVID and pre the jabs and all that stuff. So that discredited the film to a certain extent. That is true. But the statement that was made by the embalmer that I said at the 13-minute and 15-second mark, that 100 embalmers at a conference raised their hands yes when he asked them. Like I said, that statement is either true or it's false, right? And I contacted the Ohio Embalmers Association, and I found a vice president of the Ohio Embalmers Association who said he is indeed seeing the clots.
Tom, I really enjoyed speaking with you. Time's running out, but I wanted to ask you about you met Novak Djokovic, and you.
I think you butchered the name a little bit.
I know, right?
You must not be a tennis fan, are you? I'm a big. I played tennis in high school, and I'm a big tennis fan. Novak Djokovic, yeah, he's the world #1 tennis player from Serbia. If you remember, Novak over the last couple of years has not been allowed to play in countries like Australia, the United States. He's missed some of the big four tournaments, like the Australian Open, the French Open, Wimbledon, of course, and the U.S. Open. And he's been missing some of those tournaments because he refused to take the vaccine. He refused to take the jab. So countries barred him from playing. Well, this summer, finally, the United States lifted its ban on him, and he was allowed to come play in the U.S. And the very first tournament that he came and played in was in Cincinnati, Ohio, just about an hour south of me. And it's called the Western and Southern Open, and it has both men and women. So the tournament is a big tournament. First of all, because it's the big tournament right before they do the U.S. Open, and it's a nice tune-up because they're playing on a hard court surface here in Cincinnati, and they play the U.S. Open on hard court surface in New York as well. So Novak, he came back and he's playing his very first round match, and I decided to pay some high price dollars to get tickets right down on right at the end of the court, so I could be right there. And wouldn't you know, the match only lasted a set instead of going 3 sets or even 2 sets. His opponent had to withdraw at the beginning of the second set with an injury. He pulled up lame on one of his legs. So he gave them time to do an interview with Novak on the court. So they brought down an announcer, and so the crowd was there, and the announcer said, "Hey, Novak, how does it feel to be back in Cincinnati after a couple of years?" And he could have said, "Well," he was real gracious. He said, "I missed the crowd. I love being back in Cincinnati." But he could have said, "Well, I would have liked to have played, but you wouldn't let me for the last 2 years." But he didn't do that. He's a real gracious guy. He's from the country of Serbia, by the way. So then, after that